Just over 10 years ago, I joined a military where firing me because of who I am wasn't just possible, it was policy. Now, in 2020, it is unlawful in America to fire someone because of who they are or who they love. The very ring on my finger, a wedding we celebrated, here where I'm standing, reflects how this country can change. Love makes my marriage real, but political courage made it possible, including that of Joe Biden, who stepped out ahead even of this party when he said that marriage equality ought to be the law of the land.
LGBTQ voters are a key voting bloc for Democrats, making up around 10% of the Democratic electorate. In the 2018 midterms, a whopping 82% of LGBTQ Americans voted for the Democratic candidate, making them second only to black voters in their support of Democrats. But not everyone in the community is as enthused about a Biden-Harris ticket as Mayor Pete. Primary season polls of LGBTQ voters showed a strong preference for Senator Bernie Sanders and his more progressive agenda. Perhaps that's because despite Joe Biden's achievements during the Obama administration, the community has not forgotten his spotty record with gay rights. He supported the so-called Defense of Marriage Act in 1996 and 2 years earlier voted to cut off federal funds to schools for teaching acceptance of homosexuality. Biden's running mate has a much stronger record when it comes to gay rights. Back in 2013, Senator Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California when a federal appeals court allowed same-sex marriages in the state to go forward.
We have the Attorney General on the phone right here.
You must start the marriages immediately. These marriages are legitimate, they are legal, and they are going to continue, and it's about time.
But her record as California's top prosecutor isn't spotless, especially when it comes to the rights of transgender people. For example, as Attorney General, Harris defended the denial of medical care to transgender people incarcerated in state prison, a position she has since distanced herself from. Some trans activists who were skeptical of Senator Harris say they now support her, like Pose star Angelica Ross, who says she believes Harris has held herself accountable. Still, for many LGBTQ voters, the choice about whether to support Biden-Harris 2020 remains complicated. So now here's the question. How does the Democratic Party bolster enthusiasm for this ticket when neither the candidates nor their records seem to spark it during the primaries? Joining me now to discuss the LGBTQ vote are Kate Sawson, LGBTQ+ reporter for the 19th, Aisha Mills, Democratic strategist and former president and CEO of the LGBTQ Victory Fund and Institute, and Brandon Wolf, LGBTQ activist and Pulse nightclub shooting survivor. Thank you all very much for being here this morning.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Brandon, let me start with you because I know I said in the intro that Senator Bernie Sanders had a bulk of the support of the LGBTQ vote, but you had another horse in that race. You supported who?
I supported Senator Elizabeth Warren in the primary.
And why Senator Warren as opposed to Bernie or even Biden, Harris, or any of the other people, Mayor Pete even?
Yeah, well, my support for Senator Warren and her LGBTQ platform was really rooted in two different places. First of all, she put our voices at the table, and she didn't do so in a way that was simply an attempt to check political boxes, but she did it in a way that said she fundamentally understood that as a cisgender, heterosexual white woman, she could never fully understand what it was like to be an LGBTQ American. So rather than make things up or focus group something surface level, she actually sat down with LGBTQ people. She asked us about the challenges that we're facing, and she asked us what help we needed, which kind of leads to the second piece. Because she chose to listen and learn, she didn't create some narrow LGBTQ plan that pigeonholed us into a single policy proposal. She incorporated an LGBTQ perspective into every single one of her plans, whether that was housing, healthcare, criminal justice reform. I think she understood that marginalized communities face the same struggles as others, just with inequality heaped on top as a multiplier. So that's really what I'm looking at right now. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, Mike Pence. Which of Joe Biden and Donald Trump is going to put our voices at the table? Which of those men is willing to listen and learn from our struggles. Which of those men, come January 2021, is going to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office with an understanding that we need policies, not performances? And when I put that contrast in that way, the choice to me seems very clear. It's got to be Joe Biden by a mile.
You know, Caitlin, I bring you into this conversation, and you write for the 19th. You wrote a piece sort of outlining, you know, the issues that the LGBTQ plus community has with the Biden-Harris ticket. I want to put up this, or with Senator Harris. I want to put up an op-ed that our friend here at the show, Chase Strangio, wrote for Out Magazine. And he wrote, "I believe that people can evolve, but I don't believe that Harris has or will. It was not that long ago that as Attorney General of California, Harris argued in court that trans people in prison should not have access to medically necessary care, that sex work should be criminalized because it facilitates the spread of HIV, and that early parole for people locked up in California's unconstitutionally overcrowded prisons would jeopardize a critical source of, parenthesis, free labor for the state." Since that op-ed was written, Chase has written many tweets since then saying that the first Joe Biden, then the Biden-Harris ticket, he is full square behind them. From your reporting within the LGBTQ plus community, has the community started to shift from being, for lack of a better word, anti-Biden, anti-Biden-Harris, to shifting over to where Chase is now, which is it must be Biden-Harris?
I don't think there's any questioning about whether or not LGBTQ people are going to fall all over themselves to vote against Donald Trump. By and large, this community feels like the election is life or death. The Trump administration has been so targeted in their attacks, especially toward transgender people, that there's no doubt about the need to get out and vote. I think the question here is, are LGBTQ voters, who are historically not just voters, but activists a lot of times when it comes to voting, going to really rally their communities around getting out the vote of their friends, or are they going to hold their noses to vote? And that is a really key distinction in this election. You never want to be someone that queer voters are voting, against the other candidate. It's, are they excited about this ticket? And I think there are some really mixed reactions with the Biden-Harris ticket.
That's really interesting, the way you put it, whether it's a distinction between, getting out and being enthusiastic and rallying to vote versus going to the voting booth, holding your nose and voting. And it reminded me of what I would hear from African-American voters when they were waiting for Joe Biden to pick his running mate and saying, if it's not a black woman, that will determine whether I rally around people, get people to vote, or just go vote. And that's the only thing that I do. Aisha, to that point, should the Biden-Harris campaign be concerned that LGBTQ plus voters might not be as enthusiastic as they need them to be to vote in 2020?
Well, Jonathan, let me just not think about the strategy for the Biden-Harris campaign, but speak to what LGBTQ Americans should be thinking about with regards to this election. The reality is, hands down, Biden and Harris will be far better for us as people than Trump. There is not a decision point here. So whether you are tepid about the two of them or not, our lives are at stake. And it is consequential that we show up in earnest to get rid of the guy who's currently in the White House. That just goes without saying. And so, if we remember 2016 and how we got ourselves into this mess, we had a similar situation where the conversation constantly circled around whether people were enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton. Did folks actually like her? Were we holding our noses to go and vote for her, be it African-American men or, whatever constituency of the day the conversation was about? We saw where that got us. The idea that we even have a choice to disengage or engage less than we otherwise would is not a choice anymore, in my opinion. So to all of us in the LGBTQ community, I just want us to remember that the stakes are high and that we have to show up. The second thing that I would say is that, we like to critique our candidates and look at their record, and that is extremely important. I also, given, where I have been situated in this movement, have had the honor and privilege to be on the side of trying to move things forward. So surely Biden, who's been around for 40-something years, has a record. Kamala was a prosecutor. She has a record. The question becomes, when they get elected, what are we going to do in the first 100 days as a community to hold them accountable to hiring even more record-breaking numbers of LGBTQ people into the administration than Obama did? And he made history with those numbers. Who are we going to get in cabinet seats? What policies in the agencies are we going to be able to advance to support LGBTQ people? We also should be thinking about our agency and our power as a movement to force their hand and hold them accountable for changes that we need to see. So I would say everybody needs to go show up and vote. That shouldn't even be a conversation about whether we're, bored or not. And secondly, what are we going to do when they get into office to make sure that we are driving forward the advancements our community needs?
Actually, Aisha, what you said is reflective of what Yvette Nicole Brown said on the show yesterday when she basically said, you need to have them in office, and then once they are in office, that's when you really get to push and hold them accountable, because at least then you have somebody who's actually going to listen to what you have to say. Brandon, President Trump retweeted a tweet from Richard Grenell, who was the chair of the Long Cabinet of Republicans, and you can see it there on the screen. President Trump made history for LGBT Americans, and nobody knows that better than Rick Grenell. This is from the Long Cabinet Republicans, but Grenell has called President Trump the most pro-gay president in American history. Brandon.
It's hot garbage. I mean, it's totally delusional. You don't get to be an ally of the LGBTQ community and leave large chunks of the community out. What I know is this, and Aisha said it perfectly, we don't have to guess what kind of president Donald Trump is for LGBTQ Americans. We don't have to believe Richard Grenell on how Donald Trump will treat LGBTQ Americans. We already know because we've seen the policies in action. This is a president who fired thousands of transgender people who made the incredible sacrifice of serving in the U.S. military. This is a president who kicked transgender people out of homeless shelters and argued that same-sex couples should be barred from adopting children. This is a president who just 2 months ago, on the 4-year remembrance of the shooting at Pulse nightclub, tried to rip non-discrimination protections away from LGBTQ folks going to see a doctor. Donald Trump has been at war with the LGBTQ community from the day he set foot in office. So to Aisha's point, there really is no choice here. There is no binary. There is no decision to engage or disengage. We have an amateur fascist in the White House who has LGBTQ folks squarely in his crosshairs. And our fight today is to wrestle the country back out of his greedy, corrupt hands on November 3rd, because quite frankly, there may be no democracy left once he's done with it.
Kate, I want to get you to answer basically the same question that I had in mind when Yvette Nicole Brown said what she said yesterday about in terms of that people would have, the progressives would have the ear of the administration if it's Biden-Harris. Do you think the LGBT plus community believes they will be heard if the Biden-Harris ticket becomes the Biden-Harris administration?
I think to an extent, yes. We saw throughout the convention a lot of LGBTQ people, speakers saying this is the most pro-equality ticket that we've ever had. And that is really absolutely true. When we saw Obama run in 2008 and 2012, we didn't have, a president or a president running who supported, marriage equality. And so things have really moved. It's absolutely true that this is the most pro-equality ticket that we've had. And we saw a speech on the last night of the convention from Biden where he wasn't talking about LGBTQ people. And all of Twitter, all of the LGBTQ people were commenting, and they weren't commenting on whether or not there was mention of LGBTQ issues. They were talking about how well they did at the convention. And I think that's really significant because you're no longer looking to say, did they check all the boxes of mentioning trans people, of mentioning queer people? You're really looking to see, okay, are they presenting well? And that's a huge shift, because I think the assumption now is that this administration would for sure prioritize queer people in office.
Aisha, let me give you the last word. React to what Kate just said.
Yeah, so let's also be reminded that queer people, LGBTQ people, we are also women, we are also Black, we are Latinx. We have a range of issues. Some of us are poor. We are domestic workers. So I also want to just remind us that for our community, we're not necessarily singular issue voters. So marriage equality is the law of the land. That was a big issue that I was a leader around. Mm-hmm. We ultimately won. We need to preserve it. But moving forward, our lives holistically matter. We want health care. We are in the worst economic crisis of a generation. We are dealing with COVID. Our schools are horrible. There are so many things that affect us. And so as we think about this ticket, as we as a community think about how this administration will support us, all of us at our kitchen tables are also considering every other issues that affects our lives. And the Biden-Harris ticket is hands down the only ticket, the only administration to be that is going to holistically support the vast majority of Americans. That is the only thing that matters in this conversation.
And with that, we have to leave it there. Aisha Mills, Brandon Wolf, Kate Sonson, thank you very much for having this really important conversation.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Up next, the mother of all Never Trump mega panels will tell us if the word Republican still has any significance.